Hi, I'm with Amy Oakden of Oakden Law. Welcome.
Thank you.
And so today we are going to entitle this segment To Trust or Not to Trust and the importance of putting your properties in a trust. So Amy is a wills, estates, and trust attorney. That's her specialty is probate, trust law. She handles all of that business. And so I wanted to have Amy on today to talk about the importance of putting your real estate in trust. Anybody that owns any type of real estate and why that is so important. But first, let's talk about your background.
Okay, so I have been, well, first of all, lived in Temecula my entire life, born and raised here. So,
Wow.
Yeah, a little different. Went to Temecula Valley High School, was the only high school out here at the time. Then went to Cal Poly Pomona for my undergrad, Chapman University for my law degree.
Nice.
Out of law school, started out in civil litigation, so a lot of lawsuits, a lot of court, a lot of conflict. I didn't really love that area of law just because I don't like that much conflict,
Sure.
which is why I did ultimately make the shift into estate planning, because that's exactly what we're trying to prevent by having a plan in place.
Right.
But I think having that background did kind of put me in a unique place to actually be able to really anticipate and see ahead of time where we might expect that type of conflict.
That makes sense.
Just from seeing it from the other side.
Sure, because that's what happens. I'm dealing with clients right now, several sets of clients actually that are dealing with parents who passed away, and children who are fighting over the house, no trust, no will, nothing in place, and it's a mess.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mess, and the tensions are heightened. It's emotional. People are trying to grieve. They're dealing with the death of one of the parents, and and then there's conflict with the siblings, and people aren't speaking to one another, and it's like these things could have been resolved more easily, not completely, but easily ahead of time if it was thought out beforehand to put the property in a trust or a will. But I mean, obviously the trust is a better vehicle, correct?
Right. Yeah, it is. Yeah. And I'm sure we'll get more into that.
Okay.
So 2014 is when I started doing estate planning at my previous firm. Really loved it when I got into it because of that, being able to be proactive about helping people stay out of court and out of conflict, and really just make sure that their families are well taken care of and that they know exactly what to do if something happens to a loved one.
Okay.
And then 2020, I decided to branch off on my own, opened up my own firm, and then that's where I am today at Oakden Law.
Nice. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And being a homegrown girl too.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is really, really awesome. So I'm going to ask you a few questions I think are very important. So how does estate planning intersect with real estate, and why is it so important for homeowners to have an estate plan in place?
So I think the way that it really intersects with real estate is when you buy a home, that's obviously probably going to be your largest purchase that you ever make. And that's really when people need to start thinking more about estate planning. I mean, I think anybody over the age of 18 needs to do some kind of planning.
Right.
But when we're talking about avoiding probate court, if something happens to you, that's really the time when that becomes really necessary to keep that home out of probate if you were to die without an estate plan. And just as a background, probate is a court process. So if you die without a plan or with the wrong plan, then there are certain assets that have to go through that probate process. And a court determines, based on state law or your will, if you have a will, who gets your assets and how they're distributed.
So benefits, let's talk about a trust versus a will.
Okay.
Because my mom is all about a will. She's old school. We talk about trust. She doesn't understand it. She doesn't understand like the benefits, but there is a benefit to having it her property in a trust versus having a will, correct?
There is, yeah. So I like to think of, and we're talking about a revocable living trust. There are several different types of trust. That's the most common when people talk about estate planning. So I like to think of a trust as like a will substitute. So with a will and a trust, you can say who gets all of your assets when you die. But if you only have a will, then chances are that those assets are going to go through probate.
Okay.
If you have a trust, everything stays private, no court intervention is required, so it avoids probate. And then you name a trustee ahead of time who is going to be responsible for gathering all of those assets and then distributing them according to the rules that you put into the trust.
Okay, so a trustee versus an executor.
Right.
Okay.
Similar role. So executor is the person who is going to take your will into probate court and make everything happen through that process with court oversight. A trustee is the person who is doing that same role but without court oversight through your trust.
So if someone dies intestate, they have neither or. They either have a trust or or a will. So at that juncture, you're hoping that, because I one of my agents recently came to me and said this person died, they had nothing.
Right.
And so everybody's trying to figure out where to begin. I'm like, you have to call an attorney
Mm-hmm.
and unwind it or put it together or whatever that means. But that's a mess, right?
It is. So dying intestate, you're still going to end up in probate if there are assets that have to go through probate. And then the judge is making determinations based on state law. So whatever is written in the probate code is how your assets are distributed. And I've seen nightmare stories happen with just leaving it up to the government. I know we don't necessarily want to leave any plans up to the government,
Right.
Usually not the best plan. So we've had cases where like a son is now sharing a home with a mother-in-law because there was no plan in place.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's we encounter this so much, being realtors, and dealing again with trust in place or not having a trust in place, or someone thinks they had a trust. My parent had a trust, but we don't know where it is. When my grandma had passed away, she had a trust drawn up years ago, and she hadn't had that trust updated in 25, 30 years. And I found the attorney, and he'd since then long retired, and he had a copy of this trust in his garage and file cabinet.
Oh my gosh, that was lucky. Doesn't always happen that way.
It was very lucky. It was crazy. Okay, so let's talk about what are some common mistakes that people make when it comes to including their real estate in their estate plan, and what can they do to avoid those mistakes?
Well, one common mistake goes back to what you just talked about with your grandmother's trust, not having the trust updated enough to keep up with the changes to your assets, your family, or the law. And we see that happen all the time. We include and encourage a review every 3 years just because changes happen, especially to your assets. So what can happen is you have this trust, it's great when it's drawn up, but let's say you buy a new piece of property and you forget to put it in the trust, and now years down the road your family's still going into probate with this property because it was never added to your trust.
So question, with a will, you can do a codicil, right?
Right.
To update it. Is there something with do you have to redo your entire trust, or can you do like an addendum, amendment, or something like that?
Yeah, not necessarily. So if you're just adding property to your trust, as long as you're okay with the property being distributed, whatever is already written in the trust. So if your trust says, I leave everything to my 3 kids in equal shares. You buy a new house, you put it in the trust, and you still want it distributed that way, you don't have to do anything to the trust itself. You just add the property to the trust by signing a deed. Or when you go through escrow, you tell escrow, I have a trust, and they put it into the trust for you 99% of the time. If you want to actually make a change, let's say that house is designated for just one of those 3 children, then we do an amendment.
Okay, so it can be amended.
Right.
Okay, perfect. And so for realtors working with clients who need to buy or sell a home, how can we identify when someone might need to contact an estate planning attorney?
So you are, as realtors, part of that process of going through escrow, them asking, how do you want to take title to your home? If they don't say, oh, I have a trust and I want it in the trust, that's maybe the time to start having that conversation, because I know the way that your brokerage and your realtors deal with your clients, and you are basically like a concierge service to them. And it's a long-term relationship that you're establishing with them, which is what I really like about you and all of your agents that work with you. So you want to be there to support them and guide them and let them know. Maybe you can't give them legal advice, but you can identify and say, hey, do you have a trust? And if they say, yeah, then you say, well, you might want to actually put that home into that existing trust. And if they say no, maybe that's when you start having that conversation with them and just letting them know what can happen if something were to happen to them without an estate plan. And again, not providing legal advice, but just maybe providing information, because there's so many people out there who just don't know. And, you know, we don't know what we don't know. So
well, I think that unfortunately, sometimes people don't realize they need a trust until it's too late.
Right.
And which leads to segue to my next question. Why do you think estate planning is often overlooked? And what would you say to someone who feels like they don't need an estate plan? So, I mean, I have young buyers who, they buy a home and they're young and they don't think of you're young, right? You're going to live forever. And so I think the expense is probably something that is preventing sometimes for them to sit down and go, well, we have all these expenses. It's not critical. We're going to live forever. We're not going to worry about putting our property in a trust. But I think even at the onset of any type of owning real estate, that's important.
It is, yeah, because and I think part of that is people think, first of all, when they're young home buyers, there are so many other expenses going on when you're buying a new house, and I get that, but starting to plant that seed, like we talked about earlier, is important with your clients. And then also just maybe having them go meet with a lawyer. Most lawyers will offer that first initial consultation at no charge to them to at least get the education, find out what would happen with no plan in place. Because I think when people do realize how much it could cost their family not to have a plan, spending that initial few $1,000s on the foundational estate plan makes a lot more sense when you see how much you're actually saving in the long run by doing that.
Well, and it's a good habit to just start. You know, I think people think, certainly if they take a couple, if they vest as, married couple, community property, if one person passes, go to the other person passes, go to the other. But beyond that, as their assets grow, it's not just inclusive of just their houses that they purchase. And what I always encourage, especially my young people, when I sit down and we're buying a house, I say, when I see you again, it's going to be to rent this house out because you've saved for another. Although I'd love to sell your house for you. I'm in the business of selling homes. We do property management as well, but it's really to give the advice I wish I had taken when I was younger. Continue to grow those assets, and those you need to have in a trust to protect. So what's one piece of advice that you wish everyone knew about planning for their future, regardless of their financial situation?
I think exactly what you just touched on is starting early. And I think with saving, financial planning, and just planning for the future. And I know, planning for death and incapacity isn't fun like planning finances and things like that can be, but it's important. It's an important piece of the puzzle, and it should be part of your full financial plan. Yes. So I think, just start as young as you possibly can.
And I think nobody tells anybody that. I mean, I feel like when I'm sitting down with the younger, and again, I'm talking about less, younger than 30, and, they're squeaking to get into a house, and I'm having this conversation like, you need to make sure you're putting your house in a trust, and they look at me like I have a third eye. But it's really, again, it's, hindsight's 20/20, and there's just so many things that it's a value. And, yes, at that age, it is a tough, you're, again, squeaking to get in a house, but early on to protect your assets that you work so hard to purchase, and I think that the younger the better, right? And as you get older, then you're just you're modifying it as needed. I love that you do that. You advise looking at the every 3 years, because my trust has changed a bunch of times over time. So talk to me about, so young couple comes to you, they have a house, they don't have many assets yet. So you're going to advise one that they put the property in a trust. What is the benefit of that for them at that point if someone were to pass?
So if one person passes, like you said, there are ways that you can own property where if one person passes, it automatically passes to the surviving spouse with no probate required. But the benefit of planning ahead of time is looking beyond that, because we don't know what's going to happen in life. We don't know if you're both going to pass together, if one's going to pass, and then do you want the other one having full and complete control over this property where they can get remarried and now let the new spouse in. So it's all of these things that we need to look at.
People don't think about that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that kind of having the more control, if that's important to you. And also just planning for, we know that both of you are eventually going to die, like 100% guarantee.
Yes.
Sadly,
Yeah.
I wish it were different, but just planning for that inevitable so that you have that plan in place. And I know it sounds a little bit cliche, but it really does provide you with that peace of mind of having that plan, knowing what's going to happen, knowing that the people that you're leaving behind are going to be well taken care of.
Yes, absolutely. And so a life insurance policy goes into that.
Yes.
So that is part of the trust. So are the houses are put in the trust name? Life insurance policies are put in the trust name?
No, life insurance policies have beneficiary designations.
Okay, so they don't need to be.
Yeah, and depending on how the trust is structured and whether there's minor kids involved, Sometimes we list the trust as primary beneficiary, sometimes contingent beneficiary, just dependent on how everything is structured.
Okay.
But that means that ultimately the life insurance proceeds can be paid into the trust. The trustee can control them and then distribute the assets according to the trust.
Got it. Got it.
And we don't sell life insurance, but we work with referral partners who can help them. And if they don't already have a life insurance policy in place, that's definitely something that we look at with them, especially, younger couples who might have not very much equity in the home and want to make sure that the spouse is taken care of if something happens,
Yep,
right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so talk to me about a circumstance. Obviously, can't share names, but something that maybe you came across that you went, whoa, like that, this happened, and thankfully we were able to step in and handle the situation. Like something that may have happened that you can share with everyone as far as like, this is one of the reasons you need to have this in place.
So one, I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, but that was an actual case where I said son and mother-in-law are sharing the house. So the wife passed away, did not have a plan in place. So that's where we have intestate succession stepping in. The property belonged solely to the wife. It was her separate property, not community property. So under state law, they did not have children. So under state law, the beneficiaries of that separate property are surviving husband and surviving parents. So mom was living. So now husband and mom both co-own this home that husband was living in with wife.
Right.
So.
Sure.
And you can imagine, I don't know, I love my mother-in-law. I still wouldn't want to share a house with her or be forced into that very kind of uncomfortable situation. Right. And now it's a fight to see who's going to buy out who. Are they just going to sell it? It's a big mess.
Yeah. We've just, like I said, recently, there's so many messes we're trying to unravel that are, it's preventable. Mm-hmm. It's preventable. And so, I think people get, afraid of the cost of going to an attorney to get a trust set up. Can you share any, like the just getting started, if someone wants to come to you, the consult is free, right? Mm-hmm. But let's say young couple, they have a house. Like it obviously the more in depth that you need to draw up a trust, that's going to lead to more expense.
Right.
Okay. So let's talk about that. If they're somebody just starting out and they want to come and they say, hey, Amy, we'd like to come in. What are we looking at for a cost?
So our plans range anywhere from $2,500 for a very basic plan, all the way up to $8,500 and up for a much more complex plan. Usually clients are falling somewhere in that $4,000 to $5,000 range. Okay. But I think the importance is shopping on price alone. Mm-hmm. And I know why we do that, because we don't know what other questions to ask, right? So price is a big factor. Sure. But you also have to remember, like the old saying, you get what you pay for. Sure. So if you're paying $795 for that estate planning package, is it going to work for your family? Right. I'm not saying it's not going to, but that is definitely one of the big questions. With that, what's included? Are they helping you fund the trust, which means putting all the assets into it? Is there a process for regularly reviewing the trust? What else is included in that? If you're working with an attorney and it seems too good to be true, what other services are not included in that, and how do they bill for those services? Is it hourly? Because once you start running into an hourly rate, you're going to run up fees pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. So those are all kind of things to consider rather than just shopping on price alone.
Okay, very good. So Amy, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And how can people reach you?
You can go to our website, oakdenlaw.com. It's OAKDEN law.com. Or call the office, 951-888-2244. And then our socials, I think they're all at Oakden Law.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right, thank you.